In this lesson, we'll be learning how to work with video inside of Adobe Photoshop. I've got a finished file here with some of the main features working with the timeline in Photoshop, and let me just run this and maybe talk through it a little bit, then we'll start a new file from scratch. As you can see here, I've got a timeline in Photoshop, which is a fairly new addition once we were allowed to work with video in Photoshop. So let me just play this back. I'll just rewind to the beginning here and hit the play button and let you see what I've constructed so far.
Yes.
Okay, so a fairly short piece, obviously. Let me just go through the timeline here and then I'll talk about the layers a little bit. Then we will actually build this up again from scratch, as I said. Looking over at the timeline here, I do have my set of playback controls up at the top here. I've got a audio on-off switch. I've got a split at playhead feature, which we'll get into shortly. And we actually have our transitions under this button right here, which is our fades and our cross dissolves and so on. Over to the right a bit more, we actually have our timeline, and it is time-based, of course, and it has a number of tracks in it. There are various types of tracks. Let me start at the bottom, I guess, here. We have what are called audio tracks, which will drop in our own unique audio to accommodate the video edits that we're going to do. Then we have another type of track called a video group. That allows us to put on various different clips onto the same track and edit the timing of those. And you can see them over here actually in the layers under video group, and I could collapse this or expand it. Very similar to our layer groups, but it manifests itself on a single track when we're looking at it in the timeline. Then I have unique video tracks on their own layers, if you will, in the timeline here, and they are the equivalent to the layers in the layers panel over on the right hand side here. This one I've got opened up here. This is actually a graphic layer, which I've turned into a smart object up here. And it's composed, let me move the playhead a bit here. It's composed of two elements. One is just simply a backdrop, a raster backdrop gradating from a solid color to transparency. And then on top of that, I've got a text layer with a drop shadow effect added to it. And in fact, because I made it a smart object, if I was to double click on it, I guess in the layers, if I was to double click on it, I can still actually go in and edit that set of layers, if you will. For example, if I wanted to change the text and so on. Let me go back though to my original video. It does pop it open, as you saw here, as a separate file. I can actually just close that as well. So in effect, that's a nested movie clip inside of a movie, if you will. And if you notice over here in the timeline, there are these little arrows which make them collapsible and expandable. And depending on the type of track it is, we'll see various features in here. The one I've included in here is the movement, which in this case, under a graphic track, it's under the transform. And it's very simple actually. If you go along here, you can see these diamond shapes. Those were generated keyframes that I created by clicking this diamond shape. And if I move along, I keyframed it off stage. Then I brought it onto the stage and I put another keyframe here. Then I dropped another keyframe down the road here, which basically holds it in position for that duration of time. And then I put a keyframe at the end where I dragged my graphic to the top up out of the stage, and it does do the tweening or the animation in between those keyframes. And I can actually apply this to any video clip. If I collapse this here, you can see that the other clips do have various properties that can be animated and so on along the timeline, such as position, opacity, and style, which really opens up a lot of Photoshop features to our video tracks, if you will. Okay, at this point we're ready to initiate a brand new file for video editing. And the way we start with video is we actually open one of the video clips straight from the Photoshop Open File menu. So I'll do that and it will initiate a brand new file. So I'll go open and I'll go to my files that I've already downloaded, which you should have downloaded as well, contained in a folder called Cut to the Beat. Now I do have one extra file in here, which is my previously created Photoshop file that I used to demonstrate. But you should receive 5.mov video files and 1.aif audio file. So just start with the first one, highlight it, and click open. What that does is it establishes the frame size, the codec, the resolution, and so on based on the properties of that first video file that I opened. You notice what has happened here. It's called up the timeline. It's placed that first track in a video track on the timeline. Now come over to the layers and take a look at what it's created here. It's created what's called a video layer group. It's similar to the layer group, but this contains videos into one group. What does that mean? Well, basically that allows me to put more clips. Any clip that's in this video group will appear on the one track in the timeline. So if I wanted to add more tracks to this single timeline, I would go to this plus sign and add the other track. So I'm going to do that. I'll go one at a time here. Open. Now if your timeline or if your screen is small like mine here, you cannot actually alter the view of the timeline with this little slider down here. So I'll shrink it quite a bit because I am going to put all 5 tracks on the one timeline. So now you can see I have 2 tracks. If I move my playhead, scrub it along, we've got a couple of shots here. So I'll just keep hitting this plus sign and adding to that video group. Now you'll notice in the layers they are being added to the group. So let me hit the plus sign, grab the third one, I'll grab the fourth and the fifth one as well. Okay, so as I said, these are all part of a single video group. Let me go down to this audio track. What we're going to do here is we've got a bit of music. We're going to put the music in, then we're going to edit to the music, if you will. I'll click the plus sign on my audio track and I'll add that file called incredible.aif. Now it's considerably shorter than what the clips are, but let me just rewind here and play this back.
Yes.
So you can hear the sound now. If I go past the sound, obviously you will not hear any sound. And you can see here that it's running okay, but it's running a little slower than the normal speed because it is currently rendering as I play it back for the first time. If I was to go back here again and play it, it does run a bit smoother. Okay, but you can see that there's no audio. The audio only goes this far. That's how long the duration of that audio clip is. So that brings me to my next move, which is to reduce the length of these clips. It's quite intuitive and simple, in fact, to modify the duration of these clips. And I can take a bit off the front or a bit off the back. You notice when I slide over with my cursor that the icon changes. This allows me to drag, and it does snap, and change these clips. So if I wanted to take some off the front end of this one, I would do this. Now you'll notice that it will snap and push it forward when it's on that one video group track. I will show you a way to work around that once I bring these in a bit tighter. And again, I can either trim it off the front or off the back, and this is known as trimming. Let me just grab this last one here, and if I drag my playhead back or hit my rewind button,
Yes.
see that play out. Now if I find this is a bit loud, you'll notice there's a little icon at the end here on all of these tracks. I can manually go in here actually and change the duration. I can actually change the speed too. I can make it slow motion or fast motion, which is pretty cool. But let me go down to the audio track and actually just turn this volume down. I'll go down to say about 30% here. You notice too I have the ability to fade it in and fade it out as well as muting. Now we can also do these fades with transitions, which I will introduce to you in a few minutes. But let me go back here, rewind it. And it's just a little bit quieter. Now that I've got it sort of at this scale, I actually will stretch the view of that out a bit further so that I have a better view of what's going on. Now another thing we can do within the video group on that layer, that timeline, is I can actually reshuffle the order. I can actually grab a track and move it around, and it will just snap. You can see a little black line appear at the intersection basically where it will get inserted. And I can shuffle these around in any order I like without a problem. Also, if I want to create a new track, if I want to pull one of these clips and generate a brand new track and isolate it, I actually need to do that in my layers panel, and I can grab this. You can see it highlighted over here as well. And I just need to drag it above the group to establish its own layer, if you will. And by establishing its own layer, it actually also establishes its own track in the timeline. And I can then take that and move it around, and whatever footage is available, I can potentially retrim that clip. And you can see here when I'm grabbing the beginning or end points, I do get a preview of the frame of where it's being trimmed to. Now if I put my playhead right here, it will play. Since this is overlapping, as soon as we see that appear, as the stacking order dictates, that's what will appear on screen. As you can see, I'll do that one more time here. Okay. So that's trimming, that's reordering, and that's establishing a new track. Again, establishing a new track is done by grabbing a video from the video group and dragging it in the layers panel to its own separate layer. Another thing I can do is add transitions. If you look over here, we've got this little icon. If I click on it, I have a very limited set of transitions that I can use, but they are there to use, and they work through a drag and drop method. So if I want to do a fade, I literally drag the icon to the beginning or the end of the clip, and it will fade. And I can just click to lose that window here, and let's see what happens here when I hit play. Now the fade seems to have gone a little bit past, so I will drag this further to create a smoother fade, if you will. There we go. I can also adjust that fade by right-clicking, or on the Mac, control-clicking it, and I can even change the type of transition that it is, as well as the duration. If I want it shorter, I can do that as well. And I can actually delete it here also. And I'll just click over here to get rid of that window. I just basically shorten that fade. Now I can also delete the fade by highlighting it and hitting my delete key. And I can do that with tracks as well. I could highlight a track and hit delete, and boom, there it's gone. I will undo that. But basically transitions are quite simple. You just call up the transition and you drag it to the clip that you want to apply it to. So I've done a fade with white, and I could put that at the beginning of all of these. And it's kind of a funky editing method, if you will. But I'll just play back from the beginning.
Yes.
And it kind of does that little snap from white to the next edit. Okay, so those are transitions created by dragging and dropping. Now another thing we can do with our clips is we can split them. That is to say, chop them up into pieces. All I need to do is highlight the clip I want to cut, put the playhead at the point that I want to have it cut, and if you look over here, we've got a little pair of scissors. We just need to click on that, and you notice that it made an incision there. And I could chop this up, to whatever reasonable limit that the footage will allow me to do. Once that's done, I can actually highlight it and move it around and do anything I want as if it was a unique separate clip. I could drag it to other tracks and so on. Now the next thing I want to do is introduce you to putting graphics in your video and then taking that a step further and animating those graphics. So let me go up to the top layer here and then generate a new layer directly above that. I'll actually name this layer title bar. And I'm going to use my marquee tool to establish a rectangular area as a nameplate. And using my gradient tool, I will create a gradated nameplate, if you will. Let me just pick a color here. Maybe I'll go with something a little bit brighter, so a dark red, and go to my gradient tool. Make sure it's on foreground to transparent. And I'll start the ramp about 40% of the way in from the right. Shift key down and just drag it. I don't want it to go to pure transparent, so I'll drag a bit past the box. But you can see here that there is some translucency happening on the left side. I can just deselect, Command D, to start that. So you see I have one graphic layer right now. And you see it also represented inside of the timeline. I'm going to create a text layer on top of this, add a little drop shadow to it, and then show you how we can animate the group. In other words, the two different layers. What I will do, I'll tell you that right now, is I'll grab those two layers, highlight them, and turn them into a smart object. But let me start by creating some text, and I guess I'll just make it white. I'll just type over here. Let my type tool initialize. Alright, just type in the middle. I'm going to center this text, so I'll choose centering. And I can see that I'm on impact at 26 points. We'll see how that works out. And I'll just type in full name. So this should be your full name. I'll say full name here. There we go. Now I want to add a drop shadow to that. I'll just go to my move tool here. I'll actually just tweak the positioning of that a bit. And then with that layer highlighted, I can go to my effects menu and choose drop shadow. And just make the changes that I want to the shadow. And I'm good with that. And there we go. So my next objective is to take these two layers and animate them flying in from the right, or rather from the left, pausing for a short time, and then flying out through the top. But I want to merge them together, if you will. However, I do want to be able to edit them if I decide to do so at a later date. So what I need to do for that is go over to my layers, with my shift key down, highlight the two layers together, then right click on that text layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. What it does is it merges the two as one, but here's the cool thing. If I double click on that layer, it opens it up as if it was a separate new file, and it could conceivably go in and make changes to the text, especially in this case, but make any changes to any elements within that smart object. In other words, it's like nesting a movie within the movie. Let me just close this now and go back to my original file. So how do I animate this? If you'll notice, in the timeline, there's another little area that we can pull down and see specifics. Depending on the type of object that's on that layer, for example, if I open these two, you'll see some variations on the properties that I can manipulate. These are mostly meant for doing animations. And let me just close this one, and what I will do is I'll demonstrate how to animate this nameplate, if you will. In this case, I want to move its position, which would apply to the transform category. So first thing I do is put my playhead at the beginning where I want to start my first keyframe. I establish a keyframe by clicking on the little stopwatch. And you notice it generates a little diamond shape. I'm going to establish another keyframe just down the road here a little bit by moving my playhead and again hitting the little diamond. I will add some more later, but let me go back to that first keyframe. And the way we move from keyframe to keyframe are these little arrows on either side of the keyframe icon. So if I click this arrow, I'm back at keyframe 1. Now I'm actually going to grab this element with my move tool. I'll hold my shift key down, but I'm going to drag it right off the stage. And if I move my playhead, you'll see that I've created an animation with that appearing. And then it stays still. So I'm going to move my playhead along the way here, along the way. Intent is to keep it on screen for this duration of time. add another keyframe. Now here's another cool feature. I'm going to move it a little ways down again. If I make a change to that layer, Photoshop will automatically generate a keyframe. I could go in and manually add one, but I'll just demonstrate here. I'm going to move this upwards and out of the scene. And once I let go, boom, it generated a keyframe on my behalf. So if I drag my playhead back now, hit play, it will be a little slower this time because it's rendering at the same time, but if I hit play, there we go. Up and out. Those basic rules apply to any clips that you have in your timeline. You can animate opacity, you can actually animate style, which is pretty cool, but you can also animate positions and duration on screen. So again, if I want to render this all out, I actually need to play it back once from the beginning, which I'll do. I'm just going to make sure my sound is still at 30%, and it is. And I hit play.
Yes.
And there we have it. Now if I was to hit play again, you see this faint green line. That tells me that it has created, I guess, a temporary render for smoother playback. So if I was to drag my playhead back now, I won't run the whole thing, but it's definitely smoother, as you can see here. Okay, so those are the basics on how to edit in Photoshop, how to create movement, how to create animation, and how to play and work the timeline. Now the final stage in our process, obviously, is to actually output this as a video file. So we can do that a couple of ways, but I'm going to go up to File, Export, Render Video. And the first thing I will do is establish where to save this. And I'll save it in that same video folder that I've been using, but I'll give it a slightly better name. I will call it first_ps_video. First Photoshop video. Now I have other options. You can leave it at its default settings and you'll get an excellent quality video, which would be very friendly for YouTube. YouTube loves the .h.264 codec. But under presets, if you wanted to go for something other than YouTube, or who knows what you're going for, you can specify for specific devices, as well as high definition devices and standard definition output for broadcast as well. But you can see here we've actually got presets for YouTube, which is pretty sweet. It makes life a lot easier when you have all these presets made for you. I'm going to live with the default settings here. Original size, etc., etc. And I will click render. And as long as it takes, depending on your computer speed, it will render that video out. And there we go. The only thing I should do, of course, is go and check that that video works fine. So here it is right here. I'm on a Mac, so I can just actually hit my space bar to play it back.
Yes.
And there we have it. I'll hit my space bar to close that again. But on a Mac, you can preview any type of file by highlighting it in the Finder and hitting spacebar. So I'd like you to create a video for me similar to this using these files as well. And we'll just go back to Photoshop here, and I'll let you get going on that.